Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Let's launch into a new episode of Rock and Read. Today we will continue our journey through the book Set the Night on Fire by the lead guitarist of the Doors, Robby Krieger. We're on chapter 2. I know, I said I was going to wait to read more chapters from this book until I finished the Kurt Cobain book, but I just couldn't resist. Now, let's check out chapter 2. A critic once said I had the worst hair in rock and roll. It stung pretty bad, but I can't say they were wrong. I always battled with my naturally frizzy, kinky Jufro, so one day my friend Bill Wolf and I experimented with Ultra Sheen, a hair relaxer marketed mainly to black consumers. The results were remarkable. Wolf, as we all called him, said, "You're starting to look like that jerk, Brian McLean," which was the closest he ever came to giving me a compliment. McLean was the guitarist for Love, and his lustrous mop top resembled that of Rolling Stones guitarist Brian Jones. I don't know if I looked as good as McLean or Jones did, but it was a marked improvement over my usual bird's nest. Our hair relaxer experiment happened to occur about a week before Wolf and I auditioned for the Doors. Wolf tried out a few days before I did, and I was surprised he didn't get picked. He was a much more experienced and technical player than I was. We had taken flamenco guitar classes together, we had formed a jug band together, we had played as part of a folk trio together, and we had jammed in an acid rock band with Doors drummer John Densmore together. Wolf was the Doors' first choice. I was their second. But my hair looked better, and my bottleneck made all the difference. If you walk into a music store today, you can pick up a professional guitar bottleneck made of chrome steel, glazed ceramic, lightweight titanium, borosilicate glass, or even high-tech carbon fiber. When Wolf and I were learning guitar, we just smashed bottles. My favorites were the cheap California champagne bottles because they had the perfect shape, and the glass was slightly thicker than most wine bottles. Sometimes we put in the effort to tape up the jagged edges or melt them over a flame, but usually I just left them sharp. I figured if I ever got into a bar fight somewhere, it might come in handy. Wolf and I loved listening to records by Blind Willie Johnson, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Blind Willie McTell, the Five Blind Boys of Alabama. Their lack of sight apparently left them with a heightened sense of slide guitar. We didn't have a teacher who could instruct us on bottleneck technique, so we did our best to figure it out on our own. Originally, I was a purist and exclusively played acoustic, but just before my audition for the Doors, I had become enamored with the sound of a bottleneck slide on an electric guitar. So one day in the fall of 1965, I drove my electric guitar, my amplifier, and my weaponized California champagne bottleneck to a parking lot behind an office building in Santa Monica. At the edge of the lot was an alley, and in that alley was a little dilapidated house. Inside the house lived a guy named Hank, who graciously allowed the Doors to use his Yamaha piano and rehearse in his cramped living room. No neighbors meant no noise complaints. I had previously met everyone in the band, so there was no need for introductions, and John had already given me a copy of their 6-song demo, so I came prepared. The first song we ever played together was my favorite of their 6 tracks, Moonlight Drive. The demo version was much more bouncy and bluesy than the one we had later recorded together, and Jim sang in a fluttering high register that Doors fans would hardly recognize today. The guitar part plodded predictably in time with the piano. I played along faithfully. Then I asked if I could try something. I slipped on my bottleneck, and we ran through the song again as I wove in a warbling, spaced-out slide riff. Between my flamenco picking and my Muddy Waters bottlenecking, I guess I stood out from the other candidates. Jim went crazy for the sound of the bottleneck and said the Doors should use it on every song. And that's why I ended up getting the gig over Wolf. All it took was one song to know it felt right. The hair relaxer wore off after a few months, and my sexy mop top went back to looking like a frayed Brillo pad. But thankfully, by then, I had proven myself indispensable, and the Doors couldn't get rid of me any more than I could get rid of the worst hair in rock and roll. I rehearsed once more with the Doors at Hank's house, during which one of Jim's friends dropped by. Jim dragged him into a back room, slammed the door, and started shouting at the top of his lungs. As their muffled screams bled through the walls, I stitched together the context. This guy had Jim over on some sort of deal. I don't know what type, or whether there was too little of it, or whether the money wasn't right. But either way, it sounded like someone was going to get hurt back there. Ray, John, and I exchanged awkward glances and a few comments, but otherwise pretended not to notice. It was our first shared act of burying our heads in the sand when it came to the erratic behavior of Jim Morrison, and it was my first disturbing taste of Jim's dark side. In the moment, I didn't see it as any sort of red flag. For all I knew, Jim had a perfectly good reason to scream at that guy. But up until that point, he had been so reserved, so the sudden turn was startling, to say the least. As we ran through some more songs to try and drown out the noise, I stood there unnerved, thinking to myself, "This guy is our lead singer?" Eventually, Jim and his friend re-emerged. No explanation was ever given. Jim was visibly pissed off. Rehearsal was over. Well, that wraps up Chapter 2. Let me know what you thought of this chapter in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.